There is circumstantial evidence that the intelligence community and the mafia are behind the rise of the National Enquirer, the nation's most popular tabloid. The allegation is that the mafia and the CIA controlled the National Enquirer as a way to obfuscate media related to UFOs and other matters of interest. These claims are rooted in the Enquirer's founder, Generoso Pope Jr. His father, Generoso Pope Sr., was an Italian immigrant that would eventually purchase Il Progresso, the largest Italian-American newspaper in the country. Controlling Il Progresso gave the Pope family a lot of political power, and soon relationships were established with both the Italian-American mafia and with Benito Mussolini, whom the popes had admired early on. The Pope family's influence was so significant that President Roosevelt personally asked Generoso Pope Sr. to help get Italian Americans to support America's entering of World War II, and in doing so, the popes established relationships with Washington. And after the war, Generoso Pope Sr. helped the CIA defeat communists in a post-war Italy. Many poor, hungry Italians were looking to communism as a way to rebuild Italy after the war. And at the request of the CIA, Generoso Pope Sr. would use Il Progresso to launch letter-writing campaigns. Millions of Italian Americans would write letters to their relatives in Italy promoting democracy and trash-talking communism. Now to the son, Generoso Pope Jr. He grew up in this world, and his father instilled in him an understanding and appreciation of the power that came with owning Il Progresso. After graduating from MIT, Generoso Pope Jr. would briefly run Il Progresso before going to work for the CIA's Psychological Warfare Unit in 1950. President Truman personally wrote Generoso Pope Jr.'s recommendation letter for the CIA. Generoso Pope Jr. spent 2 years with the CIA's Psychological Warfare Unit, and immediately after leaving, he would buy the newspaper The New York Enquirer in 1952, the same year as the increased surge in UFO reports. And soon he changed the name from The New York Enquirer to The National Enquirer, and turned it into a tabloid running scandalous stories about Hollywood and celebrities. The Enquirer cost $75,000, and some of this money to purchase the Enquirer came from infamous mobster Frank Costello, with the agreement not to cover the mafia, and it is alleged that the remaining funds came from the CIA. There is documented evidence that the CIA has created tabloids similar to the National Enquirer in foreign countries to obfuscate truth and spread disinformation, with Pope Jr. making the National Enquirer directly after leaving the CIA's Psychological Warfare Unit, and the fact Pope Jr. maintained a close relationship with Washington for decades despite running a tabloid. It is not a stretch to say that the CIA would be involved with the National Enquirer. Now let's bring it back to UFOs. Generoso Pope Jr. bought the paper after leaving the CIA in 1952, the same year as the increased UFO wave and DC flap. And according to researcher Terry Hansen, in 1953, the same year as the Robertson panel, the National Enquirer began covering UFO stories. By the end of 1953, the National Enquirer was the publication covering the most UFO stories of any media outlet in the US. Tame saucer stories would appear right next to scandalous alien sex stories. Many fake quotes and sensational stories that still circulate today in UFO lore were first sourced in the National Enquirer. And perhaps most scandalous of all, the National Enquirer would sometimes be the first American paper to publish some of ufology's favorite cases, like Dr. Bob Jacobs' UFO event at Vandenberg Air Force Base, where allegedly a UFO disabled a dummy warhead.
Toward the end of the flight, I was looking at Major Mann saying, "Pretty good stuff, huh, sir?" And suddenly he said, "Just watch this." And as I watched, the warhead, the dummy warhead, the chaff that was put out in front of it as a decoy to deflect the Russian anti-missile tracking radar, everything was flying along, and suddenly, in the same direction this stuff was flying at about 8,000 miles an hour, an object came into the frame, shot a beam of light at the warhead, flew up to the top, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew around the direction it was flying, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew down, shot another beam of light at the warhead, and flew out the same way it came in.
This was first reported in the National Enquirer. The first American paper to publish about the Colares UFO flap in Brazil was the National Enquirer. And the National Enquirer would even be the first paper to resurface the Roswell incident, publishing their story and interview with Jesse Marcel a few months before the completion of 1980's The Roswell Incident by Bill Moore, Charles Berlitz, and Stanton Friedman. Generoso Pope Jr. would take the Enquirer circulation from 20,000 units to about 750,000 units in a few short years, and the National Enquirer would become the first ever tabloid to be carried in every grocery store in America. Everyone has to shop for groceries. For millions of Americans that weren't actively seeking out UFO books and information, their main exposure to UFOs would be seeing the outlandish covers as they waited to pay for their groceries. Whether intentional or not, the National Enquirer began tainting the concept of UFOs for Americans in 1953.